and welcome to Maven Capital Partners podcast Invested. My name is Laura Boyd and I'm an entertainment reporter and presenter. I've interviewed everyone from the likes of Harrison Ford to Rod Stewart, but this podcast is a little bit different because here I'm chatting to some of the people behind some of the UK's fastest growing companies. Everyone from entrepreneurs to business owners who have a fascinating story to tell about how they got to where they are today. The highs and the lows, we learn about the people behind these businesses and what makes them tick, as well as hearing some of their top tips and advice for those perhaps looking to follow in their footsteps. Now, today's episode is no different as I'm chatting to the brilliant Virraj Jatania. He is the man behind the app Pockit, which saw a gap in the market and helps those who are maybe struggling to get traditional current accounts. It really is a really interesting story, and I'm sure you're going to learn lots from it. So here we are. Enjoy. Virraj, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Lovely to meet you.
Good to meet you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, let's get started because you have got such an interesting background and such a fascinating story as to where you got to with your business today and how you got there. But I'm going to begin the podcast with the way we begin all of them because we want to know quite simply, how do you start your day? So tell me about what time you get up and your kind of routine to kickstart your day.
Yeah, sure. So I'm quite an early riser. So usually end up waking up around 5:30. 6 a.m. And I find that's kind of amongst the most productive hours of the day because other people aren't awake and doing things. So I tend to be up, get ready pretty quickly, and then get a couple of hours of work in before the real day starts. So that's I find that's where a lot of my best thinking time happens. It allows me not to be disturbed, so I get cracking straight away. I'll probably usually read the headlines of the news for half an hour, and then it's usually jumping into emails and planning the day ahead.
Well, I can appreciate the kind of early hours because there is something I think quite special about those kind of couple of hours when everyone's still asleep, and it is a chance where you can just get ahead before the kids come in and before the madness of the day begins. It's a good time. And Virraj, take me back to when you were growing up. So what were you like as a little boy? What were you into at school?
I think I was always sort of quite entrepreneurial from a young age. I think I was always sort of thinking about business ideas or, raising money for charities and, doing those types of things when I was at school. I think I was, I'd say, pretty well behaved. I was, studious, but I wouldn't say I was, I wasn't the smartest person, always the smartest person in the room. But I always worked hard and I loved sports. So, football, cricket, predominantly. But that used to take up a lot of my time during school as well. So, that was the sort of type of student I was.
And you've got an interesting background because you were born in London, but then lived kind of all over the world. Tell me about that.
It was amazing and hugely fascinating. I mean, I grew up in a very traditional Indian family, so we actually grew up living with like my uncles and aunts and grandparents on my father's side. So we went from sort of being used to having a lot of company and being with like a very big family to sort of being, four of us in moving around to a few different interesting places. It takes a lot of adjustment. You go into new schools and different languages and different cultures and people looking at things in a completely different way. But I think when you're young, you're also you're very malleable, right? So I think you can adjust to these situations. I think it's much easier than when you're older and you're kind of much more set in your ways. So it was fascinating, and I think it teaches you a lot. It teaches you sort of appreciation. It takes you out of your comfort zone. So I think it teaches you to probably grow up that bit faster. But it was great experience. I wouldn't, it would definitely not change that. And it was interesting when we moved back. my father, well, my parents kind of carried on sort of staying abroad, and my dad was still, setting up a lot of our family business in these different locations. So it kind of meant that my brother and I became very independent. When we were back in London, because we didn't really, my parents would travel up and down, but we'd see them every few months, and we'd kind of stay with family. So that teaches you a lot about about being sort of independent, doing a lot for yourself. Kind of, you don't always have your parents to kind of go to when you got a problem. You got to figure out things by yourself. You got to be, super proactive. You got to figure out things at school by yourself. So that was definitely a great kind of training ground. And I think one of the biggest values I sort of try to talk about in our business is around resilience. And I think I would say definitely my early years and sort of growing up into my kind of early teenage years, that those experiences definitely really kind of taught me a lot about that.
But all the while, it's because your dad is growing this business. So tell me a bit about his work.
Yeah, sure. So the family business was in consumer goods. So it started out as a soaps business in the late 70s out of Nigeria. So my family were originally from India, but my father with his three brothers set up our family business, which sort of pretty much started out of Nigeria. And as I say, it was a soaps business. It was a very like a product focus for the local market. And it grew pretty organically, and by the late 90s was one of the biggest soaps businesses in Nigeria. Business was always the topic of discussion on the dinner table. So you kind of learn a lot from that as well, which was an amazing experience.
I think it's been so interesting in this series is how many people in business have been inspired by their family, and at various different levels, from your dad's very successful company to we had somebody whose dad kind of started, who was like a plumber and stuff, but it was that kind of business drive that, and as you say, that discussion that was always around the table that kind of, whether they liked it or not, got under their skin and kind of inspired them to be where they're at. How much of an inspiration was your dad and your uncles?
Absolutely huge. I mean, I think it's inspiring. You see it sort of day in day out, the amount of work that goes into building something and to creating something successful. And the long hours, and the kind of the blood, sweat, and tears. And it's never, no matter what anyone tells you, it's never sort of a one way kind of upward trajectory, right? There's loads of bumps along the way. But that teaches you a lot as well, I think. And it's actually sort of, I think, in the difficult times where you kind of really you sort of really get the most learnings, and you really see what can be done when people kind of put their minds to creating great results. And so it was hugely inspiring. And I think one of the biggest reasons for setting up Pockit, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about, comes from just seeing a kind of a business being created kind of from the ground up into something extremely valuable. And that to me was a huge inspiration to sort of try and do something similar and build something successful as well.
Well, let's talk about Pockit. So you left. What did you study at university?
I studied computer science and management at university. So this was sort of probably a little bit before the tech world had kind of really started to take off. I mean, obviously you had the bubble in the kind of early 2000s, but after that, I think the interest in kind of tech sort of waned off a bit. And when I was at university, it was all about everyone going into investment banking. But I was always interested in kind of computers and technology and the internet and developments in broadband and all of these things kind of growing up. So I wanted to study computer science, but I was also obviously really interested in business from being around the family business growing up. So I found it was a sort of great course at UCL, which I got into, and I studied that, and I certainly sort of weighted it a bit more towards the business management side, but you're obviously doing quite a bit of computer science as well. So I think that also gave me a lot of discipline sort of as I went onto this journey to to sort of be able to understand the kind of the tech side of the business, to a reasonable degree. Definitely not an expert, but at least have some understanding. And then, as I was graduating, it was the sort of financial crisis time. So 2008,
Great time.
yeah, so great time to be sort of looking for jobs and thinking about that. That whole side of things, and actually all of a sudden, being in investment banking kind of was non-existent, right? All the banks were making huge cuts. But I spent a bit of time at Barclays on the kind of wealth and investment side of Barclays. And look, that I think it's all, I didn't spend a huge amount of time there, but I think it does teach you a lot when you sort of work at an external firm, as opposed to just going straight into doing your own thing or straight into a family business. That was an interesting experience. But I quite quickly realized, within quite a short space of time of that experience, that this was not where I wanted to spend my life, and where I wanted to spend my time, and I wanted to work hard, but I wanted to work hard for something that was a bigger purpose, and not necessarily for a large firm. So the kind of bureaucracy and the politics and all those kinds of things didn't really interest me. In sort of 2014, I wanted to set up something, and I didn't love being sort of on the investment side, and I thought that there was just so many things that excited me, and I thought were possible to kind of build, and I was sort of trying to leverage a bit on my experience from university on the computer science and technology side, and there was sort of a specific experience that kind of piqued my interest in the space that we've ended up. But in our family business, we had a lot of our own factories where we manufactured, soaps and shampoos and, a variety of different products. And we had operations in sort of Nigeria, Ireland, the US. And one thing we saw was that a lot of the people who we employed were typically sort of blue collar workers. So not high income earners, really sort of suffered from sort of cash flow volatility in their lives. And often a lot of them would maybe be paid in sort of checks or cash or into family members' account. We're clearly being quite poorly served by the kind of the financial services sector. And often we'd get sort of people come to us saying, can you help me sort of, give me a loan to make middle of the month, make end of the month meet. And so it was clear that this is sort of, felt like quite a big issue, but it wasn't something that was, something that we felt we could do something about at that time. But that experience kind of witnessing that, really, really sort of inspired me to look at why this problem existed. And 2014, I started kind of looking at the space, sort of quite blown away by how big the numbers are. You have almost 3 billion people globally who are very poorly served when it comes to mainstream financial services. Interestingly, you've got kind of problems in this space in developed markets and developing markets both. So Europe has about 150 million people. The US has about 100 million people. Obviously, you look at markets like Nigeria, India, Indonesia. There's very big, very, very big numbers of individual countries. But clearly, was like a global problem with where kind of technology was going and the way data was evolving, and the size of the market. It felt like an opportunity that was kind of too good to turn down. So kind of not really knowing much about kind of consumer retail financial services, but being from an entrepreneurial family and having support from my father and and family was a big I guess an enabler to give me that confidence to kind of get up and running and doing that. And so we started life sort of very sort of early part of 2015, and really focused on how we could kind of build a great financial services product for this segment of consumers. And we decided to start in the UK. Again, people won't know a lot of the facts, but in the UK, sort of the bottom half of adults, so bottom sort of 25 million people in the UK, kind of really struggle when it comes to mainstream financial services. So everything from kind of accessing a bank account, which might only affect a proportion of that, but all the way through to getting access to fairly priced loans, to sending money back home at a sensible price, to getting access to insurance products, having access to savings accounts, the financial education. All of these services are very limited to that group, and not many firms really focus on kind of building a product to meet the needs of that segment. And so we started Life Out as a very simple product in early 2015. It was basically a kind of a prepaid card and a wallet. It didn't have anywhere near the functionality that we kind of have today. But what we focused on was initially was making it really easy to open an account, like get up and running with us, and sort of getting a card and getting a place you could pay some money into. And what we saw, a lot of that really came out of our customer research that we did, because when we sort of started speaking to customers, it was very clear that it was a really archaic process going to do this with a high street bank. You'd have to go into branch. You couldn't do this online. You have to go and stand in a queue. You then have to have all your documents with you. You're then told by like the person at the counter or the manager in the branch that you didn't bring something, or maybe English isn't your first language and they can't help you. And it was a really tricky process for people. So we kind of really what we did was we digitized that process, and we studied the regulation quite hard. And you didn't need to do all of these things in person. You could actually open accounts for people using digital verification processes. And so we digitized that, and we made it really easy within sort of 2 to 3 minutes to be able to open an account or sort of a card with us to start with. And that kind of really helped us get kind of traction in our early days. Like we saw that was actually solving a pain point for people.
Were you always called Pockit at that stage? Did it begin as?
Yeah, it began as Pockit. Quite lucky to sort of find a six-letter brand name. Managed to get the .com domain, so it all kind of felt like it was kind of work. And we worked with a great branding agency in the early days who kind of gave us this very vibrant yellow color, which was actually the same color as our soaps business in Nigeria. So it was a kind of had a lot of sentimental value as a family as well. So we started Life Out as Pockit, and kind of obviously has continued since. And what we saw though was that whilst it was helped us attract a lot of customers, it was very clear that people wanted a much broader product. It was sort of just providing this kind of card and sort of facility to add a bit of money was not really going to kind of cut it if we wanted to keep people on for a long time. And so, it was very clear that we needed to kind of really evolve our proposition into being almost sort of like a bank. And that's sort of what we've built over the years. So, today, if you sign up for a Pockit account, you still sign up in sort of 2 to 3 minutes. So sticking to our kind of original sort of core value prop. But now you get a bank account, you can receive your salary into it, you can make payments domestically, you can send money internationally, you can get a loan through us, you can build your credit score and credit history. We also have like a whole range of sort of perks and rewards and discounts that customers can benefit from. So we've really expanded the offering quite substantially, and that was very key for us to sort of build a kind of a sustainable business. We needed to do that.
It's a fantastic thing, and it's obviously helping so many people and continues to grow. For your business, taking on external funding as well, tell me very briefly kind of what that has been like and what that's allowed you to do.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because as a family business, we never took on any external equity investment in our business. So historically and also often quite culturally, Indian sort of families don't tend to have external capital, just because often they're family run businesses, and culturally that's just sort of how it's always been. But I remember sort of debating this a lot with my father and my brother, and we discussed this extensively. And I think what we realized sort of quite early on was that one was this was not an industry which we were experts in, and both in terms of sort of just being a tech business and kind of scaling and growing a tech business, but also kind of financial services, and sort of going after direct customer acquisition. We understood branding and consumer goods and all that stuff, but it was quite different. We distributed through retailers. Like we felt that it made a lot of sense to sort of bring external capital in that could always be value additive to what we were doing. So, we've funded a substantial amount of capital into the business, but we also wanted to bring other capital and then participate along with that capital through the various funding rounds that we did. So it was definitely a big conversation because culturally it was not something that we would normally do. And in all our other businesses, we don't have any equity partners. So it was, it's definitely sort of it's a slightly different model for Pockit. But I think what was really interesting was going through that journey and just seeing how much it sort of makes you professionalize the business, and that it moves away from just being sort of a family business where things can get discussed around a dinner table, and it actually sort of you've got external capital, you're responsible to external shareholders, and you have to run things in a slightly different way, and you have to understand the kind of nuances and differences that come with that. So it's been bringing external capital has been a really interesting journey, but absolutely vital to doing what we wanted to do. Also, I think building fintech businesses are very capital intensive because you're building, there's a lot of investment and cost kind of from the technology side, both in terms of the teams that you need to build plus the partners you need to work with. You've got big, responsibility from a kind of regulatory compliance perspective, and then you've got to invest into marketing, building a brand, and acquiring customers, and all of those things mean you need quite a meaningful amount of capital. And so I think us as a family diversifying our investments, it didn't make sense for us to put, we wanted to sort of spread our risk as well in terms of bringing in other partners who could also add value to what we're doing. So it was, it's been a fascinating journey, and we've sort of probably raised now about $50 million across sort of 4 investment rounds. So it's been it's been an interesting journey. I think the key thing is always sort of trying to choose good investors. That's the so much of this comes down to relationship and working with investors. And so I think choosing people who are supportive and work with you and have been seen other successful businesses who can sort of point you in the right direction or can help you strategically with a partnership maybe you're looking to do. I think all of those things become so important. I think just sort of taking capital for the sake of taking capital is not a great approach.
Well, Virraj, an incredible journey to get to where you are with such a successful business. But where do you see it going? Where do you want to be in the next 10 or so years?
For us, it's about building, continuing to build the business. There's so much we want to do. We're currently at about just under 1 million customers here in the UK. So there are many more millions that we believe will benefit from our product and that we want to serve. And then in addition to that, there's so many more products and services that we need to provide. We're just scratching the surface on that side as well in terms of the products that we provide. So there's a lot more we want to build across lending and insurance products and savings products and budgeting tools and helping our customers kind of on their everyday journey and financial well-being. So there's a huge amount that we want to do, and the aim is to kind of keep growing, keep scaling the business across our kind of customer base and products. And then obviously we have aspirations to build internationally as well. So we want to kind of do really well here in the UK and then look to international markets. But I think obviously along the way there's always points of assessment around is this something you sell, or is this something you IPO, or is this something that you always just kind of keep running? But I think we're on a trajectory where we'll probably drive to some kind of liquidity event, I think, in the next kind of 5 years or so. So but right now we're heads down, just focused on scaling and growing the business. That's the big priority.
Getting on with it. You touched on it earlier. So you said you get up at 5:30, you're kind of working, and then you do the busy day. And with so many people in business, it does carry on into the night. It is difficult to switch off. What do you do to ensure you can step away from things and spend time with the family? What's your kind of strategy for that?
Yeah, it's always hard. It's one of the things I think as an entrepreneur you probably struggle with the most. So I think, look, I mean, family is obviously one of my biggest priorities, and so always try and carve out time, and whether it's sort of just seeing kids before they sleep, or seeing them in the morning for a bit in between in between doing a bit of work here and there. And then often the weekends are a good time to kind of build to spend time together. So try and do as much of that as possible, but you're kind of always juggling and prioritizing. So that's definitely one way. And I think the best thing about kids is that they don't really care about whether your day has been good or bad, or you've had the best piece of news or the worst piece of news. They're sort of oblivious to it. So it's you don't have any time for kind of self pity when you're with them. So I find that quite sort of powerful, because it kind of really, it does sort of take you away from the things you might be dealing with day in, day out, kind of with a business, like ours, or like many others as well. So that's definitely one thing. And then I'm a big football fan. I'm a big Manchester United fan. So that is a great way to take my mind off of things and just relax. Kind of 90 minutes or so of like watching football and not thinking about other things. Unfortunately, they're not performing so well at the moment, so it doesn't make it doesn't make it an easy watch. But it's still a big passion. And then I enjoy things like sort of art and collecting wine and spending time with friends and things like that. So there are a number of ways to switch off. It's just try to find the actual time to fit those in around what's often a very busy work schedule.
How do you pick yourself up from those bad days and those failures? I mean, I think for anyone starting a business, as you say, there's going to be inevitable highs and lows and, kind of upset. How do you find that strength to carry on? What would be your kind of top tips for people?
Yeah, I think it's I think so much of it is a kind of a in some ways a mental battle. I think it's so much about resilience, and I think you've got to have that. I think this is the hardest journey that you can kind of go on, because it's a lonely place. You're the one who's got to make the decisions. You're the one who's got to find the solutions. So I think that it can be tough. So I think the being resilient and sort of, I think having that built in you is kind of critical in my view to kind of going on this journey. I think in a sort of in a successful or even an unsuccessful way. There are a number of people who fail, but I think those people are still so resilient as well in the journey that they go through. So I think resilience is key. I think the other thing, and I definitely really learned this from my father, is sort of staying calm under the really difficult and almost the worst situations is so important. There's usually always some kind of solution, but you've got to kind of be able to take a deep breath and work through finding how you solve that problem. And in my early days, I would get super stressed out when something goes wrong, and then you kind of you look back and you think, actually, like, that was a really small issue compared to things that we deal with today. So I think that's sort of really critical, is sort of kind of just sort of being able to take that step back, kind of compose yourself, and really think through the challenge that you're in. And then I'd say, going back to the point I mentioned earlier about bringing external capital in, I think surrounding yourself with really smart people, both in your team but also on your board or advisors, or even in just your shareholder base, who you build a relationship with, maintain a relationship with, that allows you to pick up the phone and ask them for advice, I think is critical. Because I can assure you that if you've got a good enough and decent sized enough bunch of good investors around you, they would have pretty much seen all of these, all the things that can go wrong. They've probably seen, and so they can share their learnings. And they're not going to solve the problem for you, and they're not going to necessarily have the kind of silver bullet, but they'll be able to help, and they'll be able to give you support. And I think that's really critical as well. And then obviously building your team. You need to have a strong team to support you, and have people who kind of really put in a lot of effort and pull their weight as well is critical, because you can't do it all by yourself.
Best bit of advice you've ever been given that you would pass on to someone else?
you've got to really focus on your business model. I think is so important. I think, there's this, especially, and this is very much kind of, I think, quite specific to sort of the tech space, but there is often been this view that you can kind of, burn through money and kind of worry about how to build a sustainable business later. And I think that to me, I've been given this advice sort of a few times by different people, but I think having a business model that makes sense and is at its core kind of is profitable. You may not be overall as a business profitable day one, but that a business that can make money off its its customers or its users or whatever it might be, I think is so critical, because I think otherwise you can kind of get into a really tricky place, and almost not worth kind of continuing to go down that path if you can't get to that point. So I think that's one of the biggest learnings that I've kind of taken. And I know you asked for one, but I'd probably say the other is around sort of good people. Sort of surrounding yourself with people who are smarter than you is so critical. And I think also realizing when they're not the right people, and making the decision quickly to take those people out of your business, because one rotten apple can sort of ruins the whole lot. So I think that's really critical as well.
Listen, it's been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing where your business grows. And I'm sure people will find all your tips and story very, very useful. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much to Virraj, and thank you as well. Don't forget to like or subscribe to the podcast, and head over to mavencp.com for more information.